Welcome to the 37th, 36th edition of The Real Business of Wine. And this is one that we had on our list right at the beginning. Orange, amber, skin contact. There's going to be all sorts of discussion over what we're really going to be talking about. But we're talking about wine that isn't white, and it isn't red, and it isn't pink, but we might actually get into some interesting discussion of that, and you'll understand why in a moment. So on our panel, obviously, inevitably, we have Simon Woolf, the award-winning writer and indeed publisher of Amber Revolution, the book on orange wine and the go-to person on the subject. Then, and I always say this, I'm going across the screen the way I see the people, but your screen may have them in a different order. Doug Wregg, who is the go-to person for natural wine in the big picture in the UK. What is now called, I think, Les Carbes, but was Les Carbes de Pyrene. Doug may correct me on that, but basically restaurants, when we had restaurants, that was where they went to get their natural wines, and a lot of other people besides. So, and Doug also, the person who runs one of the natural wine events in London, a highly popular real wine fair. Liz Gabay, who is not a natural or an orange or amber wine person. Liz is a pink wine person, author of the book on rosé. And the reason I'm absolutely delighted, one reason I'd like to have Liz here is that in a conversation that she and I were having to do with rosé, the question came up of where does rosé stop? Where does making a skin contact wine from a pale skin, a grape that's got a pink skin, where does that move us into, and so on. So, and indeed, some rosés that were actually rather white. So I'm sure that will be a topic. And Liz, also as an MW, an educator, is involved with talking to students of the subject of what is color in wine generally. And Tony Milanowski also has a history of students, because of the background at Plumpton, Britain's only wine making school historically, but now actually has crossed the line and actually involved in making wine in England at Rathfinny, which is one of the best English sparkling wines. So I'm going to throw the ball at Simon. And can you just give us, I mean, today, as I was saying earlier, I fell asleep in a Twitter debate over who first came up with the name for orange wine. And one person was saying, oh, I remember back in 1870 when I was visiting a winery somewhere, someone was saying it in Albania or Lithuania or possibly Slovenia, I think, to be more honest. Can we go back over where did we come from to get here? And obviously Georgia is going to be part of this picture.
Absolutely, yeah. I think the most important thing to say is that when you go back through history, certainly when you go back hundreds of years, and definitely when you go back thousands of years, there wasn't really any such thing as red wine or white wine or any other wine. And certainly when you had white grapes growing in your vineyard, they were inevitably going to get processed with their skins on in the past. You know, we're talking thousands of years ago and even hundreds of years ago in many parts of the world. And the reason for that is because you actually need some equipment, you need some technology. If you want to make what we now call a white wine, you need a press of some sort to get rid of the skins. And it requires rather more intervention. So people simply didn't have that option long ago. So certainly you mentioned Georgia, and in Georgia, the traditional style of wine, and indeed the most popular style of wine that Georgians will toast with at a meal, is inevitably what they nowadays tend to call an amber wine. So a wine made from white grapes fermented with their skins. Obviously then, around about the mid-90s, we had this kind of revival that started in Friuli-Collio, right up next to the Slovenian border, when people like Gravner and Radikon started experimenting again with the idea of fermenting white grapes with the skins, because it had completely gone out of fashion in Europe. after the Second World War. And so suddenly they were producing wines which first came onto the market, I think, very end of the 90s or more likely the early 2000s. And suddenly you had wines that we didn't really have a name for. And in Italian, there's a kind of way of describing them. So people used to talk about vino bianco macerato, so macerated white wine. But there was no commonly agreed term for describing these wines. And certainly, I think inevitably, lots of people will have looked at the color and noticed that the color of a heavily skin fermented white wine can go in an orange direction, can go in an amber direction, can go in a, you know, sort of dirty gold brown direction, depending on how long the skin contact is and many other factors. But I think it took a while before the wine industry, winemakers, the world at large coalesced on terms to describe these wines. So that's why a lot of people talk about this guy, David Harvey. David Harvey is a UK wine importer. And in 2004, he was doing a stage with Frank Cornelissen, a Belgian winemaker, making wine on Etna in Sicily. And they were having this long kind of theoretical conversation while they were drinking some of the best examples of this genre with no name. So they were drinking things like Vodopivets, Gravner, Radicon, and so on. And that's where this kind of long discussion ensued. Out of that, David decided that the most sensible term for these wines that fits in with our paradigm of red, white, and rosé was to call them orange wines. And there are many reasons why he chose that name over others, which we can go into if we need to. And so he started promoting that name. And by the time I came along, as I say, I mean, I don't necessarily have a clear preference for what name we call these wines, but I just noticed that even by 2012, 2013, it seemed that most people in the various parts of the world where these wines were becoming popular had got around the term orange wine. It's the easiest, shortest, most concise way to signify that you're drinking or you would like a wine made from white grapes that have been fermented with the skins. So I think that's where we've got to now. There are, you know, of course, a lot of this happens in an organic way. So it's very difficult to say who coined this term or that term or whatever. And I think, as you imply, it doesn't really matter.
Well, could I chip in? There are one or two little wrinkles, which is one is there is a region in Australia which does kind of have that name, orange. And secondly, in America, there is wine made from oranges, which is what a lot of Americans would imagine when you say the word orange wine. So if you leave the niche that knows what orange wine is, there is a certain element of confusion potentially in small ways. I would agree that the wines from Orange in New South Wales haven't taken the world by storm. So maybe outside Australia, they're not as well known, but there are, you have to admit that there are wrinkles. Oh, and as Andrew Halliwell said, they do make wines in Huelva in Spain. Again, you don't come across them very much, but it's not a completely clear picture, is it?
It's not, but I mean, but then again, it's not a completely clear picture with any style of wine, really. There are problems everywhere when you start to look. I mean, the joke I always like to make is that people say, oh, orange wine's a confusing name because people will say it's made from oranges. But I mean, people could say that rosé wine is made from roses. I mean, there are also, when you start to look, there are plenty of regions that share names of grape varieties or names of wine styles. One of the reasons David decided that amber wine wasn't a good choice is because of Van Ambre, you know, a very old-fashioned style that's still going in the Rhone in some parts. So I think the important thing is that, you know, it's a relatively niche style, but we all need shorthand, you know, we all need ways of telling people what we mean. And inevitably you see people reaching for the most convenient term. So as I say, I mean, it's not my decision or anyone else's. I don't think that the term orange wine has become popular. It's just convenient. It's convenient when you want to say this isn't a white wine, it's something slightly different.
I accept that. Simon, just before I throw the ball at Liz, because I can see where she might come in on this, tell me how many bottles, when I see bottles of wine with an orange or whatever color we're going to call it, how many of the labels actually have the word orange on them as a word?
More and more, actually. I mean, what I see is that winemakers who are experimenting with the style, so winemakers who are maybe just taking their first steps using long skin contact, skin fermented whites, often do tend to use the term orange. I mean, for example, in Canada, in Ontario, actually, it's legally allowed to write orange wine. Their legal definition revolves around the phrase, I think, skin fermented white. But you're allowed to put orange wine on the label, and quite a few people do. I've even seen a Georgian producer put orange wine on their label, although most Georgian producers are choosing to put the term amber wine.
That's kind of what I mean. You have just kind of admitted it, that in the country that is very associated with, if you like, amber orange wine, it's not a word that you tend to see on their labels, even when they're labeling their wines for non-Georgian consumers.
It isn't, no, and they've thoroughly got behind the term amber wine, and you'll often see amber dry, actually, nowadays written on traditional Georgian Qvevri wines. And to be honest, I'm still trying to get to the bottom of when did this term amber wine really become popular in Georgia. I have a suspicion that it might actually have something to do with Grabner, because he hates the term orange wine, and he's been so instrumental in kickstarting the Renaissance in Georgia. I think much more than most people realize. That I haven't confirmed this. I haven't done my research, so don't shout at me if someone thinks I'm wrong. But it wouldn't surprise me if Grabner is the one that planted that seed, that these wines should be called amber wine in English.
Thank you. Liz, can I move across to you on this? How do you, wearing not just your pink wine hat, but your wine educator MW vision of the world?
Well, I suppose, I mean, this is, as we talked about the other day, this classification, this obsession with the name of a colour and the colour. Right, so this is something, a wine I've just poured, and this is a rosé. It's made as a rosé. It hasn't had fermentation on the skin. It's just had long maceration, but technically that is a rosé wine. And I think one of the problems is that we all become so hooked up on this without understanding what the wine is. I did a tasting 18 months ago with wine from Doug. He helped me organize this tasting. And I presented the lineup of wines, and everyone's face kind of went, but they're not rosé. They're not pink. And at the end of the tasting, they all said, these are the best rosé wines we've had. So I think this obsession with colour is something I would like to see, or the terminology of colour, rosé being pink. It's distracting us from what the quality of the wine is and what the wine is as itself.
Couldn't agree more.
I think with rosé wine, I think, yeah, I mean, it evolved in exactly the same way as orange wine. Second World War and after was when we all started categorizing maybe things slightly more. And I don't think people understand what orange wine is or rosé wine is quite often. I was judging orange wine at a competition last year, and half the wines entered were skin contact wines, not orange wines, because people didn't understand that there was a difference between the two. So I think even amongst the trade, I think there's a lot of confusion as to what those colours mean and what the end resulting wine will be.
Well, thank you, Liz. You've just, with that comment, you've absolutely sort of, that's why you're here on the panel, in the sense of what it is. Now, Doug, you're in the business of selling these wines. Now, I'm going to throw in a thought, because I've been working in Georgia over the last decade. One of the things that the Georgians are bothered with is that there's been what they see as a confusion between Georgian wine in general and Qvevri wine specifically with natural wines. And they've actually done pretty well out of that confusion, I think, in many ways, but they don't necessarily want to be grouped in that folder. In terms of how many orange, amber, skin contact wines of both colors, all colors, do you sell now out of your range of wines?
Well, we have over 100 examples of skin contact wines. And I'm going to say that I think this is a spectrum, that we can have wines which have a couple of days on skins and the wines that have a year on skins. But it's also a spectrum of color. So even the ones which have a couple of days on skins might have more color than ones which have 3 months on skins. So it's there. We're happy with that confusion. I mean, basically, because wine is wine. We only call it orange wines, amber wines, skin contact wines. I now hyphenate them or do a slash, because I realize that if you call them orange wines and they're not technically orange, then people are going to have a go at you. If you call them, I think that skin contact wines is a bit dry, quite frankly, but it's technically true to what they are. And amber wines, well, again, it's a sort of description generically, but also it's amber as a color as well. We have wines made from Pinot Gris, for example, which are rosé in color, and some growers call them Pinot Gris rosé, like proper skin maceration, 16 days in amphora, and they look like rosés, what you would expect rosés, but they have the phenolics of a red, and they have the prettiness of a white. So I remember going to Good O'Gowan's, and they pulled something out of a cask, and someone said, "What's the grape variety? And what is it?" And they said, "Well, we don't care about skin color. We're sort of like we're open-minded. It doesn't matter what the grape variety is. Taste what is in the glass. Use your eyes to observe and use your palate to taste, and then understand the wine in the round." So rather than classifying wines as white. Has anyone ever tasted a white wine? What is a white wine? The wines are not white in color. What is a red wine? Some wines are red, but the spectrum of reds is pretty wide. Pink is again, it's a nonsense, because there are wines which are dark, as we saw there, and wines which are triple filtered, which are almost water white, and everything in between. And orange or amber wines or skin contact wines impinge on the pink wines, and the pink wines impinge on the red wines, and the white wines impinge on the orange wines, and vice versa. So I'm all for this sort of confusion. And maybe it's because I want the consumer, if you like, to understand that life isn't black or white or red or white or orange or yellow, but a subtle spectrum. And what I'm interested in is that people investigate how the wines are made, where they come from, what the cultural background is. To me, the story of the wine is as important as the color.
So I've had the misfortune of having to judge at 1 or 2 OIV wine competitions, which I now I have a doctor's note that says I never have to do that again. But one of the first things you do is there's a color, and I can't remember just how many points there are, but essentially, unless it's the right color, it loses points. I ignore that. I just give whatever I want to give it and just get to the score at the end. But that moves me to Tony, because you've been in the business of teaching people to make wine. And historically, if we turn the clock back, surely that was something that was there was a very clear manual that said white wine should be this color if it's made from these grapes, or that color if it's made from those grapes.
Yeah, I guess so. I think, especially if you have a WSET spectrum, we talk many times about straw and lemon and yellow and gold and every color in between, and so actually that forms the basis of some of the courses at Plumpton and other places where wine is taught, and so there's definitely this very interesting point about color. Color can tell us a lot about a wine. It tells us potentially about the grape variety. It can tell us about the oxidation contact. The appearance gives us a lot of clues, but it also can lead us very much astray. As the previous panelists have suggested, you have these Pinot Grigios that have got lots of skin contact that appear to be a light, fine, no sort of tannic wine, and then they have a different characteristic. So, I mean, classically, when you come to do any sort of sensory science in wine, one of the first things they do is they put them in black glasses, as one of the panelists suggested, and you just remove the cue of colour and appearance, and so you can concentrate on the aroma and the palate. I think colour is an interesting thing, but it only works when you have very good knowledge of the product. Otherwise, it can lead you astray. I was thinking, actually, what was the very first orange wine I tasted by the current definition, and I think it was a Mas du Mascasac Bianc, a white wine. And it was if I recall correctly, it wasn't a particularly extraordinary looking wine, but it's 7 days fermented on skins. And it definitely had the characteristics of an orange wine. But it didn't have any appearance like that, because it was obviously, I think, made quite reductively by their winemaking team, and didn't pick up much of these hues. And so actually what happened, I found this problematic, because when you are teaching about people, it can get very difficult very quickly if people are using the wrong terminology. And I settled, I ummed and ahed and asked Simon several times about what the best way to describe it. But as I was teaching about production of wine, I actually settled on pulp and pomace wines. And the idea is that the idea of a pomace wine is that you're accentuating the skins and the seeds and potentially the stalks of the wine. And in the case of the pulp wine, you're looking to accentuate the liquid inside the berry over the solids. And so I found that the better way to teach and talk about the wines. And then the question is, what color grape do you use to make a pulp wine? What color grape do you make to make a pomace wine? And that's how we can, have lovely Blanc Noir sparkling wine, or our light pinks, and all the things in between.
To me, this fascinating part of what we're going into, and I've got a note in the chat here, and I'm going to introduce another member of the panel who I'm delighted to have with us. We haven't got a camera on him at the moment, I don't think, but Phillip Cox, who is one of the biggest producers, we do have a picture, Phillip, who is one of the biggest producers in Romania, who makes a lot of pulp wine, and launched an orange wine, which has gone into a British supermarket. But before I move on to get Philip's view on this, there's a huge elephant in the room here, which is that there seems to be almost everybody on the panel is embracing the complexity and the confusion and the need for people to explore and do the stories and all that stuff. But Liz, you've been in the business of talking about rosé. One of the reasons why rosé has been such a phenomenal success is that it is simple. You want a glass of rosé, it comes, it's pink, it tastes the way you expect it to taste. And people, when you do give them a dark rosé or a very, very pale rosé that looks white, they're not necessarily happy to have that experience. So I'm going to put that on the table for a second, because it's relevant to you, Philip, because you'll tell everybody how many bottles of wine you make a year and where you sell them. And then anybody who wants to know more, we've done a very good whole session with Philip a few weeks ago. But tell us a little bit about what you do in general and how making an orange wine fits into your commercial picture.
We make about, hello everybody. We make about 120,000 bottles of orange wine at the moment. And we're looking at expanding that next year if the virus doesn't mess up all of our sales in restaurants. That's out of a total of 25 million bottles or so that we make all together. So it's a small part of what we do, but it's quite big in the orange wine world. And
are you one of the biggest orange wine producers in the world?
Simon can tell you that. He knows a lot more about it than me. I don't think so.
There's actually a surprising number at that level, especially in Georgia. Biggest one I know of is in Georgia. It's 400,000 bottles.
Sorry, no, sorry. Oh, Georgia. I was going to say Georgia apart. I was thinking in places who are making non-Qvevri as people.
Well, one that might surprise people would be La Stoppa. So a kind of cult natural wine producer in Piemonte. Their biggest selling wine is their orange wine Ageno, and they make, I think it's about 75,000 bottles a year of that. And they're regarded as a natural wine producer, but just so that's important.
So Philip, do you put orange on your label?
Yes, I do. We've only been doing it for 3 or 4 years now, and we're enthusiastic newcomers to it. So we've found that, especially for supermarket business, it's a good thing commercially to have it very clearly as an orange wine and as a natural wine too. So we quite often write both, with the exception of America, where we're not allowed to write orange wine for the reason you mentioned before. They won't let us use it because it might confuse people to think that it's made from oranges. So in America we call it amber wine.
And you because you're a very commercial, I mean, unashamedly commercial business, when you're making that wine, did you have a color, an orange color in mind when you started to make it?
We've been evolving it every year. We definitely wanted it to have a orange hue, so that I think one of the other panelists said that you don't want to be accused of not being orange at all, because then it looks like you're trying to deceive people. And we have endless arguments about how cloudy it should be and how funky and offbeat. And we're just trying to make a balance, really, of what is nice to drink, what people think it should be, I mean, the actual wine drinkers, and trying to make it better every year, because it's and trying to fit within all of the definitions, which is not easy because, as you know, there's no law about it. I was just arguing with old Alice earlier about whether it was a good idea to centrifuge orange wines, and I stopped doing it because of Simon and Alice.
So thank you for that. Now, Simon, let's go back to you, and thank you, Philip, for helping to direct the conversation where I wanted it to go, which is this question of whether orange wine is natural wine and whether natural wine has to be orange. I mean, the two of them seem to be, are they cousins? Are they brother and sister? How do they fit together as categories?
They are close cousins, and there's a reason for that, I think, and that is, you have to remember that post 1950s, 1960s, wine technology took the wine world by storm, and nobody thought that doing skin fermented whites was a smart move anymore. It was regarded as a bit old fashioned, not something you'd put in a bottle, I don't think. So the point is that when people started to rediscover this style, both in Georgia and in Europe, and people started to think, actually, this does say something interesting about our terroir or whatever, then inevitably the kind of winemakers who were premeditated to start making this style tended to be those winemakers who were at the traditional minimal intervention end of things. So certainly Radicon and Grabner, the two pioneers who I think really, were some of the first to really market this idea, fit into that bracket. So the reason that people often confuse the style is because some of the very first commercial examples that you could buy in a bottle were absolutely unflinchingly natural. They were cloudy, they were defiantly cloudy, especially in the case of Radicon. They looked different, they tasted different, and they smelled different from what people thought that conventional wine should smell or taste like. So I think that's why people so often conflate these two terms, and they assume that all orange wines must be natural. And for me, it's very clear. Natural wine describes a kind of loose, all-encompassing philosophy about how you make the wine and what you do in the vineyard, whereas orange wine or amber wine, or whatever, insert your favorite name, describes, for me, a winemaking technique, nothing more than that. So yes, they overlap, but I think it's like comparing apples with pears. One's a technique, the other's a philosophy. There's a huge overlap, but there are orange wines that don't fit into the natural bracket.
I'm going to pick you up on that, and I'm going to go back to Tony on it as well. But a lot of Georgian wines that are Kvevri made would not fit the natural wine criteria. I think that's fair to say, isn't it? In terms of whether it's sulfur use or whatever.
I
certainly know of some.
I wouldn't say a lot. I think, again, obviously natural wine still, you know, is still an evolving definition. Most people would argue that natural wine, certainly from an idealistic standpoint, must mean that you start with organically grown fruit, whether you've got a piece of paper to prove that or not. And if we take that on board, then yeah, there are quite a few Georgian producers where, how should we say, it's a little bit fuzzy on that score, what's really going on in the vineyard.
Thanks. Now, back to you've just said it's got to be skin fermented, but actually, and you made the point, Doug, of how long that juice has been on the skins. This is Tony, as a winemaker. Can I just do one night? How long do I have to actually leave the juice in contact with the skins, fermenting rather than pre-fermenting, obviously, to be able to tick a box and say, oh, I've got a pumice wine rather than a pulp wine?
Well, I suppose for me, it's the intent of the what you're trying to do. You know, I mean, if you really are trying to extract interesting characters from the skins, then that is achieved through alcohol, heat, and agitation, for want of a better sort of combo. And we tend to employ all three of those, whether we're making red wine, for instance, or potentially orange wines. We tend to have warm temperatures. We tend to allow the skin to, the pomace, the skins and the seeds and the stalks to remain in contact with the alcohol as it gets up and up and up, and that's the intent, is to break down those skins and to extract that characteristic. And so I think that's the only way I really find it working. I looked into, I followed Simon's book on the sort of the legislative elements, and it's quite bizarre that the two he highlights, South Africa and Canada, they have a minimum number of days, which is, you know, quite weird, because if you do it at 15 degrees Celsius or 25 or 30 degrees Celsius, you'll get a pretty different result. And in fact, I know many red wines that aren't spending 4 days even on skins. You know, there might be 3 days. And even classically thermovinified reds are 30, 40, 60 minutes on skins, and they're definitely, you know, got the character of the skin coming through. So I think it is really about the intent of it. You know, if you're intending to get those characters of the skins, then you work towards that effort, and you know, it's more agitation or higher temperatures or whatever the case may be.
Can I also move on to something, because I'm going to put raise my hand, because I'm working on a project in Georgia where I'm not sure that most people ordinary consumers that I talk to, necessarily get orange wine when it's given to them for the first time. I've certainly tried it with all sorts of different examples, particularly non-aromatic examples. And it's not what they expect wine to taste like, and some of them get the taste and some don't. I'm playing with actually blending aromatic skin fermented Georgian grapes, particularly Kisi, for example, and Rathfinny, with tank fermented, non-skin fermented grapes, and in different proportions. And I'm finding some very interesting results on that. Do you see a future in which orange wine becomes a component as well as a standalone product? Actually, Tony, I'm going to stick with you for a second as a winemaker, and I'll come back to you, Simon.
Unmute myself. I'll have to hold fire for a second.
Okay, then I go to Simon. How do you feel as the purist, as the orange man? How do you feel?
It's not just the future; it's already happening. And actually, I mean, just as Doug was hinting, that's something that I find so interesting. I think we've moved from an age. I think in the 2000s, we were maybe at a point where orange wine was it was seen as something completely far out. And we've moved forward from that age, and I think most winemakers now just see it as another tool in the toolbox. So you'll have, for example, someone has mentioned in the chat already, Craven Wines in Stellenbosch. They're making a Claret Blanche, which is I think it's a more or less 50-50 blend So half the blend is skin fermented and the other half is fermented after pressing in a barrel. And there are plenty of other examples. There are even examples in Georgia, actually. I was interviewing a winemaker by the name of Bayer Andulace. So Bayer's wine is her brand, and she's making a wine from Imereti, which is, I think it's only 30% of the skins. So there are all manner of edge cases, hybrids, blends, you name it. So we're rapidly getting to a point where this category is definitely breaking down. But that's normal. I mean, it happens in wine with everything, with every category, I think, not just with orange wine.
So now we can talk about the business of it, because this is a whole category that did not exist, as you were saying, in the 1990s. I went to Georgia in 1988, I think, and my first experience of orange wine was very shocking to the entire group of British visitors at the time. We'd never come across anything like it. Now, when we fast forward to 2020, how is orange, amber, skin contact, pomace, and I have to say that I'm not sure how many consumers have come across the concept of pomace. I thought pomace was something you used to clean, you use in a bathroom rather than in wine for most people. How is it fitting into the wine world outside, with no disrespect to you, Doug, outside specialist distributors like yourselves? How is it working in a broader context, whether it's supermarkets, it's broader wine shops, or indeed restaurants? Simon, how do you see that happening? I mean, your book has been a great success, hasn't it?
It has, but I think that's because there are already people in every corner of the globe who like this style. I mean, I think, you know, wine is full of niches. It always has been. And some things come into fashion, other things go out of fashion. But I did some research, it's a bit more than a year ago actually, before speaking at a conference, about the traction that various wine styles get on social media. Instagram in particular was interesting to me because it's a slightly younger demographic, and I think you get lots of fairly raw kind of emotion about wine or anything else there. You know, it's not necessarily people posting great long blog articles or people from the industry putting lots of technical details. So for me, it was a good way to take the pulse of what people get excited about in wine. And what I found was that if you look at Sauterne, or you look at things like sherry, they get either about the same or less traction than orange wine does. So I think in terms of what excites people, and maybe particularly younger wine drinkers, things are shifting quite rapidly. And I think people who haven't grown up with the baggage that maybe some of us have about what traditional wine or classic wine or whatever you want to call it might constitute, a lot of people simply aren't worried about these references. They're not worried about, well, you know, wine made from white grapes ought to be this color and it ought to taste like that. You know, they're used to going to natural wine bars if they live in a city because they're everywhere. You know, these wines are available. So I think the landscape is shifting rapidly, but it is partly generational. I mean, I also did a calculation last year. I did a back of an envelope calculation on roughly how many producers there are in each country where orange wine could be said to be being made commercially. I got to 34 countries, I think. There cannot be any less than 20-25 million bottles of skin fermented white wine that are being sold and enjoyed every year. And it could be double that, triple that, quadruple that, I don't know. So sure, it's a niche, but it's a niche that is every bit as commercial as things like, it's probably more commercial than Madeira, for example.
I'm sure it is. Okay. Sorry, I'm going to bring Philip in because you're at the sharp end of the commercial side of it. And firstly, what prompted you, because you've only been doing it for 3 years, to start making orange wines, and how did you sell it? Were you already in contact with a supermarket before you, because there's a certain amount of risk involved in making a batch of orange wine, surely? Philip?
With all of our wines, we try and do what our customers want. So all of our wines are kind of made to order, if you like, for special projects with our customers. And we did a very small batch in, I think, 2016 or 2017. And we sort of pitched that to some of our big customers. A lot of them are supermarkets. A lot of them are big on-trade companies. And because of the work of people like Simon and Doug there, it's become definitely a media. Simon is right in saying it attracts more media and more enthusiasm than other kinds of wine. And we've managed to get several quite big companies to sell it, like Aldi and big Japanese supermarkets. The reaction to it, though, does vary. I think it's still, for the general public, a bit avant-garde for like major supermarkets. It's not, doesn't sell fast enough for companies like Tesco or something in England. It's still a bit on left field. But for on-trade, for specialists, and in some countries it's very important, like in Japan, it's very mainstream. So it differs around the world.
But I have to say, I've been looking around. I've looked at US supermarkets, for example, and I've looked at, and certainly the UK ones. Companies like Aldi, Marks and Spencer's were the chain, I think, that took your one in the UK. Am I right in that? I think
we had Asda, we had Aldi.
But has Asda maintained it? Is it still in Asda?
Not right now. We don't have enough because we've been selling most of it in Japan, oddly enough.
So is it going back into Asda again, or?
It might do, yeah. Possibly. We're looking at it from the new harvest, depending on how England's economy goes.
That's a fair point. Liz, I can see you nodding. Do you see, you're saying that the growth in rosé, which has been phenomenal over the last, let's say, decade in particular, and I think that Instagram thing is very relevant in terms of rosé, and maybe it is also relevant in terms of the color of orange wine. Do you see that? Do you see a linkage there? Liz?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Simon and I had talked about this Instagram tally before. And I think one of the problems with rosé on Instagram, I mean, there are Japanese pop stars called rosé. There's lots of different tags with the rosé, which has made it quite difficult to home in on it as a style. And it's also been hijacked, I think, where orange wine or amber wine on Instagram or social media has remained quite a trendy niche. I think rosé in marketing has been devalued as a niche, in that it's either the cheap commercial pale pink, not always cheap, style, and so it's sort of been it's developed a different commercial profile. Nobody wants it to be a skin contact blended rosé. I mean, as you were saying earlier, with the orange wine style blending in with normal production, there are an increasing number of rosés with longer skin contact in, but it's not a style that people want to talk about. And I think that is something that maybe handicaps the marketing. It's not something that people want to discuss intellectually, what is happening with rosé. People are very happy to leave it as the pale pink, easy style. Somebody was saying earlier that should their rosé, Provence producer, should their rosé be dark or pale? And the comments were things like, it has to be pale because it matches the Provence sunshine. And I think, what? Really? Where is this coming from? So there is a sort of psychological, people are very prepared, even if orange wine, amber wine is not good quality, people are prepared to accept it because it fulfills that niche of what they think it should be. And the exact opposite with rosé wine, even if it's a more exciting wine. So, I mean, I can see Philip nodding. People want pale pink rosé. Doesn't matter. So, it could be exciting, but they don't want it.
So I've got a question from Angela Lloyd that I'm going to throw at you, Doug, because it is in terms of stylistic. Are orange amber wines seen by the consumer as wine to be drunk young, like a non-skin contact white wine, or something to be aged like a red wine? Or is there a rule for the people who are buying your 100 or so amber and orange wines? Doug?
Yes, to both. So just like we have a Beaujolais, sort of juicy Gamay, a chillable red you want to drink within the year, and then you have a Bordeaux or a Northern Rhone that you can age for 5, 10, 20 years. Similarly with skin contact wines, we have 2019s at the moment, which are fresh and aromatic, and we're selling 200-300 cases a month, even during this time. And there are things like Simon referred to La Stoppa, the Ageno, which is released with several years of bottle age, or L'Alta Mlecznik's wine, which is always released with 4 to 5 years age. It's released, but it's still got 15 to 20 years on the clock. And if I had a big enough cellar, I would certainly be aging a lot of the more structured styles of wines. But for me, it comes down to the quality of the grapes. If you're farming organically or biodynamically, you've got terrific quality grapes, low yields, you make the wine carefully, you age it on the lees for a long time. It's not about the length of skin contact, it's about the material in the wine. Then you age it in the bottle, then you release it. You've got a wine will age as well as any red wine, as well as any considerable red wine. And whenever I have a chance to taste old orange wines, my God, they blow my mind, because they're just so complex and tight. And they also seem to work in this sort of combination of reduction and oxidation. So they move between different states. So if you decant them or carafe them, you see the wine constantly evolving the glass, coming out, going back into its shell, coming out, going back into its shell. And for me, that makes them incredibly gastronomic and really thrilling wines to try. I'm sure Simon's had similar experiences. These are very much living wines. But there are commercial examples. If you want a simple wine, we have one from Puglia, which it's a filtered, tastes like orange juice. It's delicious, and a great summer wine. Then that's fine as well. There are plenty of examples of easy drinking orange wines.
Thank you. Now, Tony, you want to make a point about grape varieties, which is good, because that was a question that's very high on my list. I've got a very strong personal feeling about this, but you go ahead.
I think one of the problems we get actually with talking about orange wines and the way we talk about them, and also rosé wines, is the style trumps the variety. And of course, every winemaker knows that it's about the grape and the place it's grown and the climate it's grown in, and yet all that gets pushed to the side because not every variety is really suited to every style of wine. So, Doug made the point about the difference between Beaujolais and Bordeaux, and yes, they're completely different wines. And you would always say a red wine from Cabernet and a red wine from Gamay or from those regions. And I think we should probably be more specific about our discussions of orange wines, because the reason those Northern Adriatic, those Ribolla that's a grape that's not the most exciting when made as a white wine. It's a pretty insipid wine. I remember actually drinking lots of sparkling versions of it, so little flavour when pressed off for skins. It really needs a technique to really extract that character, and that's obviously where we're moving. And some of the muscats can be absolutely sensational. So I think we should talk about which varieties we make into orange and which work best. The ones we made at Ponton the first year, we tried to make some skin fermented white wine. We used a Schonberger, a little known sort of crossing of Pinot and Chasselas, and has a lovely pink skin, and I thought it would make for a nice orange wine, and it did. The problem is I just didn't have enough of it, and so we had to bulk it out with some other material. And so I think we need to, be a bit more discerning, about where we source these grapes to make these wines.
Can I throw something in there?
My experience in Georgia. So can I just pick up on that quickly, because it's something I feel quite strongly about. I know it's absolute heresy in Georgia, but Riccazzatelli, which I think is a fundamentally ordinary grape, I find that when you make it in February, it tends to taste of February rather than anything else. And I find that's very true of quite a lot of orange wines. The moment I find that any kind of aromatics in the grapes, not necessarily go as far as muscat, to me, makes a more interesting final product. But I know that a lot of people actually what they want is that combination of relative neutrality of grape plus the orangeization of the winemaking. Sorry to use this time, go ahead.
Yeah, no, all I wanted to add is that I think sometimes we're inconsistent in how we think about this. Because I do think that if you have, you know, Doug has stressed the importance of good quality fruit, well, so has Tony actually. And I think if you have high quality fruit, the grape character can come through loud and clear with skin fermentation. I mean, after all, it does in red wine. So if it does in red wine, why not in orange wine? It's the same winemaking technique after all. And the example that I always think is good to reflect on, just thinking about varietal character and how it comes through, is if you think about Cabernet Sauvignon, you know, it's quite a recognizable variety. Obviously, even though it's grown all around the world, it has recognizable characteristics when it's made as a red wine. You make Cabernet Sauvignon as a rosé, as a very, let's say, a very pale, light rosé with very little maceration. It's quite hard to recognize what the varietal is there. So I think for me, a lot of the time, skin fermentation of white varieties unlocks a different character of that grape variety that we might not be as familiar with. But for example, I mean, skin fermented Sauvignon Blanc from Styria, for me, is so characteristic. You can recognize it a mile off once you get used to it. It has these kind of sagey, herby aromas and a little bit of the aromatics that you'd expect in Sauvignon Blanc without the skin. But it's just absolutely unique and very easy to hone in on if you've had enough examples of it.
So Simon, can I just, I'm going to see, looking at the clock, you mentioned La Stoppa making a lot of successful, their biggest selling wine is an orange wine. We've got Phillip making large volumes in Romania. How many people, I mean, obviously a lot of people, a bit like Tony was talking about, have done it as an experimental process. I've got some grapes, let's try and make a small quantity of it. And I know that, for example, in New Zealand, in Gisborne, you've got a producer there making some with the Gewürztraminer very successfully. How many people, as of now, are moving into making large volumes, significant commercial volumes of orange wine in the way that many have moved into rosé in the last decade?
Well, I don't think you're going to see the same volumes because this is still a niche style in the way that maybe rosé is not. You know, rosé at its simplest and saddest bulk interpretation is a mass production style. I think orange wine isn't. Having said that, there are a surprising number of producers in Georgia now who the amount to which they're scaling up their production of amber Qvevri wines is extraordinary. I mean, there are many producers now who've crept over the 100,000 bottles a year mark and beyond, and it just seems to keep going.
But can we set Georgia again, because it is their national style, and historically, if I'm looking at La Stoppa and Phillip's business in Romania are interesting because it's not what is associated with those regions historically. How much are you seeing in the world, in France, or how many producers are you saying actually getting into this in commercial volumes?
I think it depends it depends what you should call commercial. And I think we shouldn't forget that if you're a winery selling 25,000 bottles of wine a year, if that wine sells at a good price and you own your own land and you own your own winery, that's a good business. There's nothing that says that can't be commercial. Commercial doesn't have to be millions of bottles.
It's a word, in fact, I'll step back from it. It's not a word I like to use anyway, but in terms of, I'll talk about high volumes in the sort of numbers La Stoppa, Phillip are talking about. I suppose what I'm asking about is when I'm going to see more orange wines in bigger retailers, and that's going to happen when there are larger volume producers actually coming along, like Phillip is doing, with offers that suit that kind of distribution. Are you seeing that beginning to happen? You mentioned La Stoppa and Phillip.
I'm not seeing it to a massive degree, and I think the reason for that is, again, you know, this is still considered a niche. Most large producers aren't going to be willed to make hundreds of thousands of bottles of something which is a relatively difficult sell. And supermarkets don't like cloudy wines at the best of times. So many of the things that you might say orange wine stands for, if we equate it with natural wine, which it so often is, I think they just don't suit supermarkets. They don't want people asking too many questions and say, well, why does this look like this? Why does this taste different? I'm not sure I like this. So I'm not seeing a massive movement there. But any more than to use the examples that I used before, if you go to a supermarket, how many serious Sauternes and sherries do you see on supermarket shelves? You might see the odd token offering, but it's very few. And I think we're in similar territory here, and there's nothing wrong with that.
I can see you smiling and nodding. You've got a big business which has got a lot bigger over the next 5 years. I'm sure you've got a 5-year plan and some projections of what you're doing. How do you see your orange wine project panning out? And also, obviously people are watching what you're doing. You've got competitors both in Romania and elsewhere. Do you see it being a growing area, or is it just a niche? Not just, is it a niche that you've just filled a large part of?
I think it will grow. I think there's a lot of interest in it. Younger people are interested in it. Non-traditional wine drinkers are interested in it. And what we do is just making a more cost-effective orange wines and natural wines that are not hugely expensive is one way to drive more volumes, because quite a lot of them are reasonably expensive, which is a small part of the wine market, as you know. So yeah, I think it will grow, and I think it's getting more people into drinking wine, and what we do is getting more people to drink natural wines and orange wines, and our natural wines are making our other wines different, using less additives. So it's and also I was in a very interesting discussion with Simon, I think, about also the environmental aspects of it and making the whole winemaking operation more green. That's all going to be very big in the future. So it's important to be doing that already, using less irrigation, less electricity, recycling. I think that will become important over the next few years. We have Greta Thunberg and all of those people pushing us.
And packaging. I've just got a question about the way it is packaged. I'm just going to go back. So, Polly, can you just pick me up on that?
Yeah, there's a great question from the audience. It says, do orange wines lend themselves more toward alternative packaging? Is this a space that we can start to move the industry forward?
Thank you. Simon, back to, well, actually, no, Liz, actually, in terms of packaging, what's interesting is that if Provence has done one thing in the last 10 years, it has actually been to break the mold of, literally break the mold of bottle shapes, of actually saying, hey, we can actually put our wines into different shaped bottles and charge more for this. Do you see that being something that's going to happen with orange wines?
I think it depends. One reason why Provence have all these bottles is if you produce thousands and thousands of bottles the identical colour, the only way you're going to be able to differentiate is with different bottle shapes. So if you have orange wine, which is not all the same colour orange, maybe, but yes, no, I think why not? Bottles, if the colour of a wine is gorgeous, why not accentuate it? It doesn't have to be an expensive bottle, I think, but just having a shape that accentuates the beauty of a wine. I mean, we're talking about wines that look beautiful on a table. I think that's a good idea, but it doesn't have to be expensive.
The questions come up about cans, and questions, are cans going to be a big thing in orange and amber wine? Anyone think that maybe so? Actually, Philip, are you going to put your wine into cans, your orange wine?
No, definitely I don't think so. I think I might put my normal wines in cans, and I'm not saying cans could be a thing in the future, because bottles is a big problem, but people for natural wines and orange wines definitely want a more natural looking. I mean, a lot of our customers won't even take them with screw caps, for example. They want corks, and they want corks you can see because it makes it look more natural. So I think that...
So Doug, thank you for that. Doug, because I'm very conscious we're looking at time here. Doug, do you see, you've come, your 100 orange wines today, where did you come from? How long has it taken to get there?
And we first started shipping orange wines in around 2005, so quite a long time. And they were a precursor to us opening Terroir Wine Bar in London. And I really felt that the only way of selling the wines was to have them open, like at a bar, and giving people tasters and allowing people to explore the wines through their sense of taste, through recommendation, and not feeling they had to like them or, you know, not like them or be on one side of the fence or the other. And, you know, from starting with maybe 3 or 4 producers, we built the category up, not because it was an orange category or an amber wine category. It's because we genuinely liked the wines, and the sort of wines that I drink at home like pretty well 3 or 4 times a week, because I find them incredibly satisfying. I'm talking about the wines that I like to drink. They have a dimension within them. If I'm feeling like a red wine, but I want the freshness of a white wine or something like a rosé, then a good amber wine is exactly what I'm looking for. And one should also not forget that these wines are superb gastronomically. I mean, in Georgia, of course, they can match a banquet of 20 dishes. And if you go to a restaurant and you want to have one wine for the table, and it's not going to be, let's say, rosé, I think a good amber wine is ideal. So there's so many reasons why I would drink them. And again, I find the color enchanting. You know, a really good healthy color when it catches the light. It doesn't matter whether it's cloudy or clear. There's something about it that it's a color of passion and warmth and excitement for me.
Thank you. Well, Doug, you've actually done Simon's job even more than Simon would in terms of being passionate about it. Tony, as a commercial winemaker and as an educator, at least a former educator, looking forward 5-10 years from now, do you think that the niche that orange wine is, let's be blunt about it, most people have never heard of them. Most people don't know what you're talking about, and that's a fact. If we leave the center of London, the center of Tokyo, the center of New York, Brooklyn, in my part of Hampshire, 50 miles out of London, I've tried it. Most people have no idea what it is, but they don't know what natural wines are either, because they don't read about wine. They buy wine from their supermarkets that don't sell these things. Do you think that is going to change over the next 5 or 10 years? Do you think that orange wine will find its way into more supermarkets, in more restaurants, not necessarily Michelin-starred restaurants, but more the sort of easy dining restaurants that they're in now?
I think potentially. I think it's interesting. Not everyone likes red wine, so I don't think everyone's going to like orange wines. You know, there is. We sort of look at Tim Harney's work, you know, 1/4 of people want sweet wines. So sweet white wine, sweet red wine, sweet rosés. You know, that the bulk of wine is going to be not orange. That tannic profile, like a tannic red, is not to everyone's taste. But I think it will definitely grow. I think we could perhaps be a little bit more helpful with people like Simon and Doug, who are drinking these styles of wines more regularly, have much more contact with producers, contact with the varieties. I think there's a good signposting of they know what's going on. I don't drink orange wines that often. They're not in my local independent merchant in any real fashion. I've had 1 bottle of Philip's wine, which I bought from Asda. But I think, you know, if I went to a wine list, I would like to see a little bit more information, a little bit more about the grape variety, and a little bit more about the length of contact to skin, so that I can have a little bit of cues, because some of them can be quite bold, some can be a little bit bitter, some can be a little bit, you know, insipid perhaps. And I think we could be a little bit clearer with the education to us, because it is a new category. People know what Cabernet tastes like because Cabernet's been sold as Bordeaux for so long. People know what Rhone tastes like. People know what Australian Shiraz tastes like. But we need more information so we can sort of have a guess. Whether it's a bold, whether it's a bitter, whether it's an aromatic version of the. I think that will help people sort of explore the wines further.
Tony, I'm actually absolutely on your page and everything you're saying in terms of not seeing it in the stores and wanting more signposting for people. I think, Doug, your customers are ready to go into the jungle and the forest and explore and be excited and be disappointed and have all sorts of experiences. I'm not sure most people necessarily are looking for that. They're looking for a drink, whether it's rosé or orange wine, and then they may get further into it. So I think signposting is a very, very, very good point to make. Simon, I think we are 5 minutes over. Just your prediction of A, do you think more labels will say orange or amber or whatever on them? Do you think we are going to see a revolution in any kinds of packaging or anything else that's going to happen? Or is it just going, is it going to be a niche that gradually grows exponentially over the next 5-10 years?
Difficult to say. I mean, I'd like to look at the last 10 years and the last 20 years. The last 20 years has been a revolution, unequivocally. Even the last 10 years, perhaps, I think, in terms of the recognition for this technique amongst winemakers. And I say that advisedly because I actually think a lot of the growth of availability of orange wines, or whatever you want to call them, is being driven by winemakers getting behind the style. We had a question about stability in the questions here, and a lot of winemakers who want to work with the minimum possible intervention find that if they're working with white grapes, making an orange wine is the sensible thing to do because you end up with something more stable. Winemakers are driving this as much as anyone else, and I think that will continue because, after all, the combination of white grapes with skins, it's 25% of the possibilities in wine. You've got two grape colors with skins, without skins. I think it's Tony that expressed it to me so simply, actually, so I can't take credit for this. But so I think this will continue. I think more and more winemakers who maybe haven't yet jumped into the fray with this style will do so. Whether they write orange, whether they're allowed to write orange, whether they write amber, whether they write skin fermented, skin contact, it's a bit of a mess right now. Maybe in the future we'll have more legislation that helps, as we do in South Africa, as we do in Ontario, and as we're starting to see maybe in France. But who knows? Maybe that's not the most important thing. I think, to me, the most important thing is that winemakers realize there's flavor in those skins, so let's use them.
I think it's a very good way to end up. And just a quick note in the chat from Andrew Halliwell, who's made his first one in Spain this year, I believe. So it's certainly an area that's going to grow. And I'm sure if we're still doing these webcasts, I'm sure it's a subject we're going to come back to. But can I say thank you to everyone, Simon, certainly for bringing the subject to the fore and really leading the story tonight. Liz, for bringing us together between rosé and orange. I think that connection is going to be more and more interesting over time. Doug, for your passion that you've helped to drive the category. Tony, for the clarity you're bringing to it, and Phillip, also for what you've been doing in terms of actually being certainly the only person I know who's actually managed to get orange wine into the sort of stores that most people go to buy their wines. And thank you, Polly, who's been silent this evening, apart from the one time, because her sound, she's had a huge problem technically, so has been able to hear us, but not through headphones, and has had problems with sound both ways. So thank you, as ever, for everyone. And please come back. We're doing all sorts of things the rest of the week, and we're all sorts of progress. My mind is totally blank, but we're going to, on Friday, I think, the one that I am going to look. Oh yes, we've got Karen McNeil tomorrow night, who's America's biggest selling wine writer, 1 million copies of the Wine Bible. The day after that, we've got Russia, which follows on our pattern of doing India and Brazil. And the day after that, we're doing influencers, and we have one of China's top wine influencers. And we have Fabien Lene, who's going to talk about how some influencers, at least, fake their numbers. So that'll, I think, be a particularly interesting one. So follow this on all the ones that have gone on to YouTube. They go on usually within about 48 hours, and subscribe there to be kept up to date with what's coming down the loop, and stay safe. Thank you.